So there I was, 3 months into what was supposed to be a cushy gig aboard the Serenity's Pride, the galaxy's second most luxurious cruise ship, minding my own business in the medical bay and wondering if I could requisition better coffee, when the intercom screamed to life. Medical emergency, Cargo Bay 7. Repeat, medical emergency, Cargo Bay 7. Chief Medical Officer Kowalski to Cargo Bay 7 immediately. I grabbed my kit and jogged toward the cargo bays, thinking maybe some tourist got drunk and tried to fight a cleaning bot again. Happens more often than you'd think, but when I arrived, I knew this was going to be one of those days. The cargo bay looked like someone had tried to build a luxury apartment inside a warehouse and given up halfway. And in the center of it all was the thornback. If you've never seen a thornback, imagine if a rhinoceros, a Komodo dragon, and a really angry sectional sofa had a baby that weighed 4 tons and had scales that could deflect. Small arms fire. This particular specimen, name of Crusher, was the ship's mascot/status symbol/please don't eat the passengers attraction. Crusher was dying. I could tell because instead of his usual deep purple color, he'd gone a sickly gray-green, and he was making this rattling wheeze that sounded like an air conditioner full of gravel. About 15 crew members stood around looking panicked, which is never a good sign, and standing over Crusher, all 4 arms gesticulating wildly, was Dr. Krelnak, the ship's veterinary specialist. Krelnak looked like someone had stretched a lizard to 7 feet tall, given it a lab coat, and taught it to be condescending. He was mid-speech when I walked in. The cascading systemic failure has progressed beyond the point of intervention. The creature's tertiary cardiovascular system has completely collapsed, and the bioluminescent organs are showing signs of necrotic degradation. I'm afraid there is simply nothing to be done. We must accept the inevitable and begin preparations for what? I interrupted, kneeling next to Crusher's massive head. A funeral? He's still breathing. Krelnak turned all 4 eyes toward me with the kind of look that suggested I'd just asked if the Earth was flat. Chief Medical Officer Kowalski, I appreciate your concern, but you must understand this is far beyond the scope of terrestrial medicine. The thornback's physiology is immensely complex. I have 17 advanced degrees in xenobiology, and I can assure you. I stopped listening and started examining Crusher. His breathing was shallow, his eyes were glazed, and yeah, he looked pretty bad. But I'd seen bad before. Bad was a 20-year-old private with half his intestines on the outside after an IED in Kandahar. This was just a really big lizard having a really bad day. How long's he been like this? I asked. A nervous voice piped up. Click. Captain Trill, the ship's captain, skittered forward on 6 insectoid legs. Trill always looked nervous, but right now he looked like he was about to molt from sheer anxiety. Approximately 4 hours, Chief Kowalski. We discovered him in distress during the morning inspection. Dr. Krelnak has been attempting treatment. But he made a clicking sound that I'd learned meant he was terrified. Chief Kowalski, you must understand. Crusher belongs to Vex Throndar the Merciless. If his prize Thornback dies while under our care, we'll all be vaporized. Yeah, I got it. I pulled out my medical scanner and started running diagnostics. Krelnak, what treatments have you tried? The reptilian doctor drew himself up to his full height. I administered a full spectrum of xenobiotic stabilizers, attempted cellular regeneration via nano-injection, and introduced supplementary nutrients through his secondary feeding port. All procedures performed according to the Galactic Veterinary Council's official protocols, I might add. I took a sip of my coffee, which I'd somehow managed not to spill during my jog over here. Cold now, but still better than nothing. And did any of that work? The patient's condition continued to deteriorate despite our best efforts. As I said, Chief Kowalski, this is simply beyond the capabilities of modern medical science. The physiological complexity of a thornback. Right, super complex, got it. I stood up and looked at the massive creature, then at Krelnak, then at my scanner readout. Quick question, did anyone check if he ate something he wasn't supposed to? The cargo bay went silent. Krelnak's scales flushed a darker shade of green. I beg your pardon? You know. Did he eat something stupid? Something toxic? Something that's currently sitting in one of his 3 stomachs making him feel like garbage? Chief Kowalski, I am a trained xenobiological specialist. The first principle of veterinary diagnostics is to eliminate foreign body ingestion. I can assure you that such a rudimentary oversight would never. So that's a no then. You didn't check. Captain Trill's antennae drooped. Dr. Krelnak, is this true? Krelnak sputtered. Captain, the symptoms clearly indicated systemic organ failure, not digestive distress. The protocols for such a presentation do not require. I finished my coffee and set the cup down on a nearby crate. Okay, hold my coffee. Your coffee is all ready. It's an expression, Doc. Now everybody stand back. I'm about to violate about 40 different galactic medical regulations. Dr. Krelnak positioned himself between me and Crusher like a scaly, overeducated bodyguard. Absolutely not. I cannot allow an unlicensed xenobiological practitioner to interfere with a patient under my care. The legal ramifications alone. The legal ramifications of letting a crime lord's pet die are going to be way worse than whatever fine you're worried about, I said, trying to move around him. Now move. Chief Kowalski, I must insist. Krelnak's forearms spread wide in what I assumed was his most authoritative pose. The Thornback's biology operates on principles that terrestrial medicine cannot comprehend. Their neural network functions through quantum entanglement. Their blood operates at temperatures that would boil water. Their digestive system processes matter at the molecular level through a series of biochemical reactions that require 17 different enzyme chains working in perfect harmony. I stared at him. So what you're saying is he's got a stomach, an absurdly reductive interpretation of, and that stomach can get upset if he eats the wrong thing. The probability of foreign body ingestion causing this specific symptom constellation is infinitesimally small. The cascading organ failure, the bioluminescent degradation, the cardiovascular collapse, these are clearly indicators of Thornback's systemic degradation syndrome, a rare but documented condition that occurs when they eat something poisonous to them. I interrupted, looking at my scanner again. Yeah, Doc, I'm reading elevated levels of, I squinted at the alien medical readout. Okay, I can't pronounce that, but these numbers look bad, and they're all concentrated in the digestive tract area. Captain Trill clicked forward, peering at my scanner. Chief Kowalski may have a point, Doctor. Those readings do seem unusually concentrated. Krelnak snatched the scanner from my hands with one of his forearms. This is a human medical device, calibrated for terrestrial biology. Its readings on a Thornback are completely unreliable. Furthermore, the idea that I would overlook something as elementary as toxic ingestion is frankly insulting. I studied at the Galactic Institute of Advanced Xenobiology. I wrote my dissertation on Thornback physiology. I have personally treated over 300 cases of... And how many of those cases survived? I asked. The silence was deafening. Krelnak's scales rippled with indignation. The mortality rate for Thornback's systemic degradation syndrome is approximately 94%. The fact that I maintained a survival rate of 8% is actually considered quite remarkable in the field. 8%. Great. Love those odds. I pulled out my own medical kit, the one I'd brought from Earth. So here's the thing, Doc. In the Army, we had a saying. When you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. Means the simplest explanation is usually the right one. We are in space, Chief Kowalski. There are no horses here. Your Earth aphorisms are... It means stop overthinking it. I knelt back down next to Crusher and started feeling along his massive, scaled belly. You see scary symptoms, you immediately jump to scary, rare disease. Meanwhile, maybe he just ate something that disagreed with him. A young crew member, a blue-skinned humanoid whose name I could never remember, raised a tentative hand. Chief Kowalski? I did see Crusher near the waste recycling bay yesterday. He was sniffing around the chemical storage containers. Every head in the cargo bay turned toward her. And you didn't think to mention this? Captain Trill's voice went up about 3 octaves. Well, he didn't eat anything. He was just sniffing. And Doctor, Krelnak said Crusher had a rare syndrome, so I didn't think. I stood up. What's in those containers? Industrial cleaning solutions, mostly. Some lubricants for the engines. A few containers of Zenthari wine that we confiscated from some passengers who tried to smuggle. Zenthari wine. I looked at Krelnak. What happens if a Thornback drinks Zenthari wine? The color drained from Krelnak's scales. That would be, theoretically, the sulfur compounds in Zenthari wine would interact with a Thornback's enzymatic processes in a way that could cause. But surely he couldn't have. How much wine was in those containers? The blue crew member consulted. Her data pad. About 20 liters per container. There were 3 containers. And how many containers are still there? She checked again. Her face went pale blue, which I assumed was bad. 2 containers, sir. I turned to Krelnak. So, just to be clear, your patient, who you diagnosed with a rare fatal syndrome without checking what he ate, drank 20 liters of wine that's apparently poison to his species. That is, the symptoms were consistent with being massively drunk and poisoned? Yeah. I looked down at Crusher, who chose that moment to let out a burp that smelled like sulfur and regret. Buddy, you and I need to have a talk about responsible drinking. Captain Trill made a sound like a tea kettle having an anxiety attack. Can you treat him, Chief Kowalski? Please tell me you can treat him. Vex Throndar is scheduled to dock in 6 hours to retrieve Crusher for a breeding ceremony. If we tell him his prize Thornback died because we let him get drunk on smuggled wine, we'll all be vaporized. Yeah, you mentioned that. I started pulling supplies from my kit. Good news is, this is way easier to fix than some mysterious space disease. Bad news is, Doctor, Krelnak isn't gonna like my treatment plan. Krelnak drew himself up again, trying to salvage some dignity. And what, pray tell, is your treatment plan? Given that you have approximately 0 experience with Thornback physiology and are working with primitive terrestrial equipment? I grinned. I'm gonna make him throw up about 20 liters of wine, pump him full of fluids, and wait for him to sober up. That is the most barbaric, unsophisticated, unscientific. Hold on, Doc. Let me tell you about this time in Kabul when a guy ate an entire MRE pound cake and washed it down with a bottle of locally sourced vodka. Doctor, Krelnak held up all 4 hands like he was trying to stop traffic. Chief Kowalski, I appreciate that your primitive medical experiences on Earth have given you confidence. But inducing emesis in a thornback is extraordinarily dangerous. Their esophageal lining is connected to 17 major nerve clusters. The muscular contractions required to expel stomach contents could trigger a catastrophic neural cascade that would make him throw up. Yeah, that's the goal. I was already scanning through my medical database, trying to find something that would work on a 4-ton alien lizard rhino. Look, Doc, I get it. You're worried about all the complicated stuff that could go wrong. But right now, he's got a stomach full of poison. We get the poison out, he gets better. Simple. Nothing about Thornback physiology is simple. Sure it is. He's got a mouth. He's got a stomach. He ate bad stuff. We make the bad stuff come back out the way it went in. I looked up at the towering reptilian. This is basic medicine, Doc. Sometimes the fancy degree makes you forget the basics. Captain Trill skittered between us. Gentlemen, please, Chief Kowalski, are you absolutely certain this will work? Because if we harm Crusher further, we'll all be vaporized. Yeah, I'm picking up a theme here. I found what I was looking for in my database. Okay, I'm gonna need about 5 gallons of saline solution, a gastric tube, and whatever you use for activated charcoal up here in space. The blue crew member looked confused. Activated charcoal? What does burning wood have to do with? It absorbs toxins, binds to them in the stomach so they can't get into the bloodstream. I stood up and stretched. We use it all the time on Earth when somebody eats something stupid, which is constantly, by the way. You'd be amazed how often people eat things that come with warning labels. Krelnak was practically vibrating with indignation. And you believe this terrestrial remedy will work on a species that evolved on a planet with 3 times Earth's gravity and an ammonia-based ecosystem? I believe poison is poison, and getting it out of the body is better than leaving it in. I started walking toward Crusher's head. Now, you can either help me or get out of my way, but I'm doing this either way. This is medical malpractice of the highest order. I will be filing a formal complaint with the Galactic Medical Board. I will be submitting a full report to... Cool. File away. I'll be over here saving your patient. I knelt down next to Crusher's massive head. His eyes were half closed, and he was still making that awful rattling sound. Poor guy looked absolutely miserable. I'd seen that look before, usually on 19-year-olds, the morning after their first night at a German beer hall. Hey, buddy, I said softly, checking his pupil response. You're having a rough day, huh? Yeah, me too. But we're gonna fix you up. You're talking to it, Krelnak observed with disdain. Him. And yeah, I talk to my patients. It's called bedside manner. You should try it sometime. I ran my hand along Crusher's scaled neck, feeling for the muscle structure. Okay, big guy, this is going to be super unpleasant for both of us, but trust me, you'll feel better after. One of the crew members returned with the supplies I'd requested. The saline bags looked more or less like the ones we used on Earth, just with alien writing on them. The gastric tube looked like something from a horror movie. Chief Kowalski, Captain Trill said nervously. Perhaps we should wait for authorization from the ship's medical board before proceeding with such an invasive. Captain, with all due respect, your medical board is going to take 3 hours to convene, another 2 hours to debate, and by that time Crusher here will be dead and we'll all be dealing with an angry crime lord. I started prepping the gastric tube. I've done this procedure about 100 times. Granted, never on a 4-ton alien, but the principle's the same. The principle is absolutely not the same, Krelnak protested. A Thornback's digestive system operates through a series of chambered organs that process food through enzymatic breakdown at the molecular level. Introducing a foreign object into that system could disrupt the entire digestive cascade and right now that cascade is poisoned. So I'm thinking disruption is the least of our worries. I looked at the tube, then at Crusher's mouth, then back at the tube. Okay, this is going to require some physics. Somebody get me a ladder. A ladder, 3 voices said simultaneously. Yeah, a ladder. Or a step stool. Or a really cooperative pile of boxes. I'm 5'9". He's about 12 feet tall, and I need to get this tube into his mouth without climbing him like a tree. While someone went to find a ladder, I pulled out my scanner again and double-checked the readings. Yeah, those toxin levels were definitely concentrated in what I was pretty sure was his primary stomach. The good news was his vital signs hadn't gotten worse in the last 10 minutes. The bad news was they hadn't gotten better either. You know, I said conversationally, to no one in particular. This reminds me of the time we had to treat a working dog that ate an entire block of hashish during a raid in Helmand province. I fail to see how that's relevant, Krelnak muttered. Dog was high as a kite, completely out of it, stumbling around like he'd forgotten how legs work. The vet wanted to run all these tests, do a full toxicology screen, maybe life flight him to the big base. But the handler, this crusty old sergeant, just said give him some activated charcoal, make him puke, and let him sleep it off. Worked like a charm. Dog was fine by morning. That is a completely different scenario involving a completely different species with a completely different toxin. Sure, but the lesson's the same. Sometimes you gotta stop overthinking it and just treat what's in front of you. The ladder arrived, and I climbed up to get level with Crusher's head. All right, big guy, open wide. This is gonna suck, but less than dying, so there's that. Crusher's eyes focused on me for a moment. If I didn't know better, I'd say he looked grateful. Or maybe that was just the poison talking. Chief Kowalski, Captain Trill said quietly, if this works, I will personally recommend you for a commendation. And if it doesn't work, we'll all be vaporized. Yeah, I know. I positioned the gastric tube. No pressure or anything. Krelnak crossed all 4 arms. For the record, I am formally documenting my objection to this entire procedure. Noted. Now everybody stand back. This is about to get real messy, real fast. So here's the thing about induced vomiting in a 4-ton alien creature that nobody tells you in medical school. Probably because it's not covered in medical school. Probably because no sane person would attempt it. I got the gastric tube positioned and started the insertion. Crusher made a sound like a garbage disposal trying to eat a bowling ball. But he didn't fight me. Either he was too sick to care or he understood I was trying to help. I'm gonna go with the second one because it makes me feel better about the whole thing. Okay, I said, feeding the tube carefully down his throat. Celine's going in. We're gonna flush out that stomach, introduce the activated charcoal substitute, and then we're gonna reverse the flow and empty everything out. This is insane, Krelnak muttered. The pressure differentials alone could cause gastric rupture. The introduction of foreign fluids could trigger an immune response that could also save his life. So let's focus on that. I watched my scanner as the tube reached what I hoped was Crusher's primary stomach. All right, starting the flush. Somebody might want to get a mop. Actually, get several mops. And maybe a hazmat suit. Captain Trill made that clicking noise again. Chief Kowalski, I feel I should mention that Thornback vomit is classified as a Class 4 biohazard in 17 star systems. Of course it is. Why would anything about this be easy? I started the saline pump. You know what? Forget the mop. We're gonna need a whole decontamination team on standby. The blue crew member raised her hand again. Sir, we don't have a decontamination team. Budget cuts. Naturally. Okay, new plan. Everybody who doesn't absolutely need to be here, back up about 50 feet, and maybe close any doors between you and us. Half the crew scattered like roaches when the lights come on. I didn't blame them. The smell alone was already pretty impressive, and we hadn't even gotten to the fun part yet. This is exactly the kind of reckless improvisation that gives human medicine a bad reputation, Krelnak said. But I noticed he'd backed up a few steps too. You're applying primitive terrestrial techniques to a species you know nothing about, using equipment that wasn't designed for this purpose, in a situation where failure means certain death for all of us. When you put it that way, it does sound pretty bad. I checked the scanner again. On the other hand, your approach was to give up and let him die. So I'm thinking my way is at least slightly better. I did not give up. I made a professional medical assessment based on established protocols, and you were wrong. It happens. I've been wrong plenty of times. The trick is admitting it and adjusting course. The saline was flowing nicely now, starting to dilute the wine and toxins in Crusher's stomach. Now, I'm gonna need something to neutralize the acid once we start the extraction. What do you guys use for antacids up here? A technician consulted his datapad. We have Zaltraxian stomach soothers in the pharmacy. They're rated for most carbon-based life forms. Perfect. Bring me about 10 doses. And some of those mineral supplements, the ones with magnesium. And I thought for a moment. You know what? Just bring me everything from the pharmacy that treats nausea and stomach issues. We're gonna throw the whole kitchen sink at this. The kitchen sink? The technician looked confused. Another Earth expression. Means use everything we've got. I watched Crusher's vitals on the scanner. His heart rate was starting to stabilize a bit. Good sign. Okay, the charcoal substitute is going in now. This is gonna bind to the toxins and make them easier to extract. Krelnak moved closer despite himself, professional curiosity apparently overriding his disapproval. What is the binding mechanism? How do you know it will interact properly with Zenthari wine compounds? I don't, but charcoal binds to pretty much everything at the molecular level. It's not specific. That's why it works. I adjusted the flow rate. See, this is what I mean about overthinking it. You're so worried about the specific interactions that you forget basic chemistry applies everywhere. Carbon is carbon, sulfur is sulfur. The laws of physics don't change just because we're in space. An oversimplification that ignores the complexity of a drunk lizard who needs to throw up. Yeah, I'm comfortable with that oversimplification. Captain Trill skittered forward anxiously. How much longer, Chief Kowalski? Vex Throndar will be here in 4 hours. We're good. Once the charcoal has had about 10 minutes to bind, we reverse the pump and start extraction. Then we flush with clean saline, give him some fluids and electrolytes, and let him sleep it off. I climbed down from the ladder to check on the pump settings. The whole procedure should take maybe an hour, then another hour or two for him to start feeling better. And you're certain this will work? Certain? No. Reasonably confident based on 40,000 years of human medicine? Sure. I grinned at the captain. Look, humans have been treating poisoning since before we invented the wheel. We've gotten pretty good at it. Back in the day, we used to just stick a feather down someone's throat and call it a day. This is way more sophisticated than that. That is perhaps the least reassuring thing you've said this entire time, Krelnak observed. Then you weren't listening when I mentioned the combat medic stuff. Trust me, this is tame. I accepted the pharmacy supplies from the returning technician and started mixing up a cocktail of anti-nausea meds and stomach soothers. So there was this one time in Baghdad when a guy got hit with a piece of shrapnel right through the chest. Textbook fatal wound. Everyone's freaking out, saying he's gonna die. We need to call for a medevac. But the shrapnel had missed every major organ by about a centimeter. So I packed the wound, gave him some morphine, and told him to walk it off. Walk it off? Multiple voices echoed incredulously. Okay, he didn't actually walk. We carried him. But the point is, he lived. Because sometimes what looks impossible is just really, really difficult. And difficult just means you haven't figured it out yet. I checked my chronometer. Okay, charcoal's had enough time. Starting extraction in 3, 2, 1. I reversed the pump. Crusher made a sound like a freight train derailing into a swamp. Everyone might want to cover their respiratory organs, I suggested helpfully. Then Crusher threw up 20 liters of wine, mixed with bile, charcoal, and what I sincerely hoped was just partially digested food. The smell was indescribable. Several crew members fled the cargo bay entirely. Captain Trill's antennae went completely horizontal. Even Krelnak turned slightly green. I'd smelled worse in field hospitals, but not by much. Phase 1, complete, I announced cheerfully, trying not to breathe through my nose. See? He's already looking better. And he was. Crusher's color was starting to improve, shifting from that sickly gray-green back toward purple. His breathing was easier. His eyes had more focus. Now we flush, medicate, and wait, I said, starting the clean saline flow. Somebody want to get that ventilation? System working overtime? Maybe open a window? Do spaceships have windows? Viewports, Captain Trill corrected weakly. And yes, opening them would violate approximately 40 safety regulations. Right. Well, it was worth asking. I administered the anti-nausea medications and stomach soothers through an injection port. There we go, buddy. You're gonna feel like garbage for a while, but you're gonna live. Which means we all get to live. Win-win. Krelnak was staring at his medical scanner, all 4 eyes wide. The toxin levels are dropping, rapidly. I don't understand. The literature clearly states that Xanthari wine poisoning in thornbacks is 94% fatal. Maybe. Or maybe nobody tried just making them throw it up before. I started disconnecting the gastric tube. Sometimes the simplest solution is the right one, Doc, even in space. Now, I should mention that the patient is improving and everything is going smoothly are 2 very different things, because the moment I started removing the gastric tube, Crusher decided he had opinions about the whole experience. Specifically, he woke up. That's probably fine, I said as Crusher's eyes snapped fully open and focused on me with what I can only describe as extreme displeasure. Buddy, I know you're mad, but I literally just saved your life, so maybe we can. Crusher roared. Not like a lion roars. More like if a foghorn and an earthquake had a baby that was really, really angry. The entire cargo bay shook. Several crates fell over. Someone screamed. "He's going into defensive shock!" Krelnak shouted. The neural stimulation from the procedure has triggered his fight response. He could rampage and destroy half the ship. Or he's just cranky because he feels terrible and there's a tube in his throat. I kept my voice calm and steady. Crusher, hey, look at me. I'm gonna remove this now, nice and slow. You're okay. Everything's okay. Chief Kowalski, I strongly advise you to retreat to a safe distance before. Before what? Before he feels threatened and actually does rampage. I stayed exactly where I was, maintaining eye contact with Crusher. Nah, we're gonna be cool. Right, buddy? Crusher made a noise that sounded like gravel in a blender but didn't move. I took that as permission and carefully, slowly started withdrawing the gastric tube. His throat muscles contracted around it, which I'm pretty sure wasn't supposed to happen based on the horrified look on Krelnak's face. The esophageal lining is contracting. The neural cascade I predicted is him having a normal gag reflex, Doc. Relax. I kept pulling the tube out, inch by inch. There we go. Almost done. You're doing great. I must object. This level of neural stimulation in a thornback could cause a cascading system failure that. Crusher burped. A long, sulfurous, absolutely disgusting burp that smelled like death and regret. Then he slumped back down, looking exhausted but significantly less gray. Or he could just burp. I finished removing the tube and tossed it aside. There we go. All done. Worst part's over. Krelnak was staring at his scanner like it had personally betrayed him. His vital signs are stabilizing, heart rate normalizing, bioluminescent organs showing signs of regeneration. This shouldn't be possible. The toxin levels were critically high. The systemic damage should have been irreversible. Should have been, but wasn't. I grabbed one of the saline bags and set up an IV drip, finding a good vein, or whatever thornbacks had, along Crusher's foreleg, because we got the poison out before it could do permanent damage. Like I said, simple solution. But the literature. The literature was written by people who tried complicated solutions and watched their patients die. I adjusted the drip rate. Sometimes you gotta stop reading the manual and just fix what's broken. Captain Trill approached cautiously, his antennae twitching. Is he going to be all right? Yeah, he's gonna be fine. He'll probably sleep for a few hours while his body processes everything. When he wakes up, he's gonna be dehydrated and hungry and feel like he got hit by a truck. But that's just a hangover. We can handle hangovers. I started packing up my equipment. Keep the fluids going. Give him some of those mineral supplements every couple hours. And for the love of all that's holy, keep him away from the alcohol. I still cannot believe this worked. Krelnak muttered, checking his own scanner for the 15th time. This goes against everything I learned in medical school. The Galactic Institute specifically teaches that human medical practices are dangerously simplistic and dangerously effective. You mean? I climbed down from the ladder and grabbed my now very cold coffee. Look, Doc, I'm not saying your education was worthless. I'm saying sometimes all that education makes you forget that. Medicine isn't about following protocols. It's about fixing problems. Medicine is precisely about following established protocols. That's how we ensure consistent outcomes and minimize risk. Yeah, and how'd that work out for your 8% survival rate? I took a sip of the terrible cold coffee and grimaced. I'm not trying to be a jerk, Doc. Well, maybe a little. But seriously, protocols are great when you're dealing with common problems that have established solutions. When you're dealing with something unusual, you gotta improvise. One of the crew members spoke up nervously. Chief Kowalski, if you don't mind me asking, how did you know this would work? You said yourself you'd never treated a thornback before. I didn't know for sure, but I knew the principle was sound. Poison goes in, poison comes out. Patient gets better. I've applied that principle to humans, dogs, even a goat once. Don't ask about the goat. Point is, basic biology is basic biology. I gestured at Crusher, who was now breathing normally and had regained most of his purple coloration. And look, it worked. He's alive, we're alive, and nobody got vaporized. Yet, Captain Trill added nervously, Vex Throndar still needs to see that Crusher is healthy. He will be. Give him a couple hours, he'll be back to his charming self. I started heading toward the door. I'm gonna go get some actual hot coffee and maybe file an incident report. Doc, you keep an eye on him. If anything changes, call me immediately. Krelnak drew himself up with as much dignity as he could muster. I am perfectly capable of monitoring my own patient, Chief Kowalski. Our patient. And yeah, I know you are. That's why I'm trusting you with the aftercare. I paused at the door. And Doc, for what it's worth, you're not a bad veterinarian. You just think too much. Sometimes the answer's simpler than you want it to be. I left before he could formulate a response. Behind me, I could hear Captain Trill organizing the cleanup crew and someone requesting industrial-strength air fresheners. Crusher let out another burp that rattled the walls. Yeah, he was gonna be fine. 2 hours later, I was in the medical bay, finishing my third cup of actually hot coffee and typing up the most ridiculous incident report of my career, when the intercom crackled. Chief Kowalski to Cargo Bay 7. Crusher is awake and requesting food. I grinned. Requesting food was a great sign. I grabbed my scanner and headed back to the cargo bay, where I found Crusher sitting up, looking tired but alert. His color was completely back to normal. His eyes were clear. He looked at me and made a sound that was almost friendly. Yeah, I know, buddy. You're welcome. I ran a quick scan. Vitals all normal. Toxin levels barely detectable. You're gonna be just fine. But seriously, lay off the booze. It's not good for you. Krelnak approached, holding his own scanner. I must admit, Chief Kowalski, your unorthodox methods appear to have been effective. High praise coming from you, Doc. Do not let it go to your head. This was still reckless, dangerous, and violated numerous medical protocols. But it worked. Yes, he sighed, a sound like steam escaping. It worked. I shall have to reconsider some of my assumptions about terrestrial medicine. That's all I ask. I handed him a datapad with care instructions. Keep him on bland foods for a few days. Lots of water. And maybe put a lock on that chemical storage area. Captain Trill clicked over, looking relieved for the first time all day. Vex Throndar's ship has just entered docking range. He'll be here in 30 minutes. Perfect timing. Crusher's ready for his close-up. Vex Throndar the Merciless turned out to be about 5 feet tall, covered in purple fur, and had the energy of someone's overexcited grandmother. Not exactly what I'd been expecting from a guy whose nickname was the Merciless. My baby! He shrieked, rushing into the cargo bay with his arms spread wide. My precious Crusher! Daddy's here! Crusher, for his part, perked up immediately and made a sound that I can only describe as a 4-ton lizard rhino purring. Throndar wrapped himself around Crusher's massive head and started cooing at him in what I assumed was his native language. Captain Trill leaned over to me and whispered. He earned the nickname after he vaporized an entire pirate fleet that tried to steal Crusher when he was a hatchling. Ah, that tracks. I watched the reunion with amusement. So he's merciless to people who threaten his pet. Correct. Hence our concern about the situation. After about 5 minutes of baby talk and snuggling, Throndar finally turned to address the rest of us. His eyes were still wet with happy tears. Captain Trill, I cannot thank you enough for taking such good care of my precious boy. He looks wonderful. Captain Trill's antenna twitched nervously. Actually, sir, there was a small incident. Crusher became ill after ingesting some Zinthari wine from our confiscated cargo, but our medical team was able to treat him successfully. Throndar's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the cargo bay seemed to drop about 10 degrees. Ill? My Crusher was ill? And no one thought to inform me immediately? Sir, we had the situation under control within a few hours. Our chief medical officer, Danny Kowalski, performed an emergency procedure that, "You let a human treat my Thornback?" Throndar's voice was very quiet now, which somehow made it more terrifying. A species that only discovered space travel 2 centuries ago? A human touched my precious Crusher? I stepped forward before Captain Trill could have a complete nervous breakdown. That would be me, sir. And yeah, I treated him. He drank 20 liters of poison wine. I made him throw it up, and now he's fine. You're welcome. The cargo bay went silent. Krelnak made a sound like a deflating balloon. Captain Trill looked like he was preparing to be vaporized. Throndar stared at me for a long moment. Then he looked at Crusher, who was still looking healthy and happy. Then back at me. You made him vomit? Yep. It was gross, but effective. Dr. Krelnak here is one of the finest xenobiological veterinarians in the sector. 17 advanced degrees. And you, a human with presumably far less education, performed a procedure that he did not? To be fair, Doc here thought Crusher had some rare fatal disease and gave up. I just figured he was drunk and needed to puke. Simpler explanation, better outcome. Krelnak made a strangled sound but wisely remained silent. Throndar walked over to me slowly. I held my ground, even though every survival instinct I had was screaming at me to run. He stopped about a foot away and looked up at me with his large, dark eyes. You saved my Crusher's life. I mean, yeah, it's kind of my job. With a simple procedure that the expensive specialist missed. Pretty much. Throndar's face split into a huge grin. I like you, human. You have courage, and you have sense. 2 qualities rarely found together, especially in this sector. He pulled out a small device and pressed some buttons. I'm transferring 2 million credits to your account as a thank you. That's really not. I started, but my datapad chimed with a payment notification. 2 million credits. That was about 3 years of my salary. Okay, that's generous, thank you. Furthermore, I would like to offer you a position as my personal physician. Triple your current salary, full benefits, your own ship, and all the coffee you can drink. I have several rare animals in my collection that could use someone with your practical approach. I considered it for about half a second. That's a very kind offer, sir, but I'm going to have to decline. I like it here on the Serenity's Pride. The hours are terrible and the coffee's worse, but it's home. Throndar laughed. A sound like wind chimes in a thunderstorm. A human who turns down wealth and prestige to stay on a second-rate cruise ship. You are either very wise or very stupid. Little bit of both, probably. I respect that. He turned to Captain Trill. Captain, you are fortunate to have this human on your crew. Treat him well, or I will hire him away from you eventually. Yes, sir. Of course, sir. Captain Trill looked like he couldn't decide whether to be relieved or terrified. Throndar gave Crusher one more hug, arranged for his transport, and swept out of the cargo bay with his entourage, leaving the rest of us standing there in stunned silence. After a moment, Krelnak spoke. Chief Kowalski, I believe I owe you an apology. Your methods were unorthodox and violated numerous protocols, but they were ultimately effective. I allowed my education to blind me to simple solutions. Hey, no worries, Doc. We all get stuck in our own heads sometimes. I offered my hand. He stared at it for a moment, then shook it with one of his 4 hands. Besides, I couldn't have done the aftercare without you. Teamwork makes the dream work. That is possibly the worst aphorism I have ever heard. Yeah, we've got 1 million of them on Earth. Stick around, you'll learn to hate them all. Captain Trill skittered over, his antennae finally returning to their normal position. Chief Kowalski, on behalf of the entire crew, thank you. You saved all our lives today. Just doing my job, Captain. Although maybe we should implement some better security around the chemical storage area. And possibly a breathalyzer for Crusher. Both excellent suggestions. I'll implement them immediately. He paused. The part about the coffee being terrible. You were joking, yes? Captain, I've had better coffee in a war zone. No offense. None taken. I'll see about upgrading the medical bay's coffee supplies. It's the least I can do. I made my way back to the medical bay, finally able to relax for the first time all day. My datapad was already filling up with messages. 3 interview requests from medical journals, a formal complaint from the Galactic Medical Board that would probably go nowhere, and a message from my sister back on Earth asking how my boring space cruise job was going. I pulled up a reply and typed, "Saved an alien rhino lizard from alcohol poisoning today. Made 2 million credits. Turned down a job offer from a crime lord. Just another Tuesday." Then I deleted it and wrote, "Pretty quiet here. Miss you. Some stories are better told over drinks." I leaned back in my chair, finally finishing my coffee. It was still terrible, but somehow it tasted a little better than it had this morning. Outside the viewport, stars drifted past in the endless black. Somewhere on this ship, an alien veterinarian was reconsidering his entire medical education. A nervous insectoid captain was probably having a drink to calm his nerves, and a 4-ton thornback was sleeping off the worst hangover in galactic history. Just another day in space. Just another reminder that sometimes the best medicine isn't the most complicated one. Sometimes you just need to make the patient throw up, give them some fluids, and let them sleep it off. Earth medicine. 90% confidence, 10% actual knowledge, 100% effective. And yeah, before you ask, I'm including that on my next performance review.